Good morning. I'm Rosalie Schaefer, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Manatee County, I welcome you to our hot topic today. First off, this is a continuation of the program last month. How many of you attended the part 1 of the series? Okay, good. So this is like one of those serials that you get hooked on and you've got to follow to see how it ends. Well, not really, but we did divide them up so that we could have a full discussion as well as just a review of the slide program. 11 amendments will be on the Florida Constitution on the ballot. And if you've received your absentee ballot, you've seen that it is a very long ballot. And that's one reason why we're doing this program, is because the legislature put them on without summaries in some cases, which made it very difficult to understand. Today we're presenting amendments 8 through 12. Our format today will start with our slide presentation, then we will introduce speakers pro and con on some of the more important amendments. And after that, we will have questions from the audience. Speaking today will be Johnny Jackson. Johnny. And he's a WWPR radio talk show host. And he will be representing Vote Yes on Amendment 8. Countering him will be Wade Matthews. He's He's with Americans United for Separation of Church and State, working on their committee to vote no on Amendment 8. We also have County Representative Nick Azara, who will be talking about the fiscal impacts to the county of a number of the amendments. And each organizational speaker will have 5 minutes to speak, and then they will get 1 minute to rebut each other before we turn the audience loose. Now, keep in mind that some of these issues are very intensive, and no matter how you feel about an amendment or in the politics or whatever, just keep the discussion very civil and respect each other's views. Okay, I need my remote control if someone could touch that. Okay, we're going to start with Amendment 8, Religious Freedom. That's the title. Go ahead. Currently, our state constitution contains a provision, prohibiting the use of public funds for religious institutions. Its provision is much clearer than what's in the Constitution under separation of church and state. It's very specific. If passed, Amendment 8 would remove that prohibition and allow funding that directly or indirectly aids religious institutions. The amendment does not state specific uses for the public funds, just notes that the entire amendment is subject to the First Amendment provisions of the U.S. Constitution. An important issue within Amendment 8 concerns its possible impact on future school voucher programs. Past programs that included religiously affiliated schools were ruled to be unconstitutional due to the existing state no-aid provision. Amendment 8 will remove that obstacle. Okay, supporters of the amendments say that the no-aid provision discriminates against religious organizations They argue that this proposal offers support to groups with religious affiliations that provide valuable community services. Opponents say Amendment 8 would divert money from public schools and other public funding recipients, and it blurs the separation of church and state. They point out that many religious groups, such as Catholic charities, can receive public funding under the current law. Amendment 9 would authorize the legislature to grant a full or partial homestead property tax relief. However, there has been implementation legislation passed contingently after this amendment was worded to make it a full homestead property tax exemption. So the surviving spouses of military or first responders would be granted, who died in the line of duty, would be granted a full property exemption. Okay, and there's no means test, there's no age requirement. This would just be openly granted. Okay? Okay, Amendment 10. Tangible property. Amendment 10 says personal, but it really refers to business property. Most taxpayers are familiar with paying property taxes on a home. This proposed amendment is about taxing personal property used in a business to earn income. Furniture, fixtures, machinery, tools, shelving, signs, equipment. They're examples of the kind of property that is subject to the state's tangible personal property tax. Under current law, the first $25,000 of tangible public property is exempt from taxation. If passed, Amendment 10 would boost that exemption to $50,000. It would also allow cities and counties to grant additional tangible personal tax exemptions beyond the $50,000 exemptions. Statewide, if Amendment 10 passes, the added exemption amount proposed would reduce property tax collections by $61 million over the first 3 years combined, according to state estimates. Supporters say it will help small business and create jobs. Opponents question whether that will really benefit the economy and warn that it will further erode the local tax base. Okay. Ready for 11? Amendment 11 authorizes cities and counties to grant a full homestead property tax relief to low-income seniors who have lived in their home for at least 25 years. In short, it would eliminate the entire property tax bill for qualifying seniors. Homeowners who meet the following requirements would be eligible: age 65 and older, have a household income of less than $27,000 and $30. Now, I don't know where they got the $30, but if your household income is less than $27,000 and $30, you will be exempt. The home you live in must have a market value of less than $250,000, and you have to have lived in the home for at least 25 years. Okay, effects of voting yes and no on 11. Okay, Amendment 12. This one has caused a lot of confusion because it has to do with the 17-member Board of Governors for the public universities of Florida, and the student representative on that board. It changes the current system. Currently, the president of the Florida Student Association is, by virtue of the position, a member of the Board of Governors, where he or she gives the student point of view on the governorship of the universities. But not every university chooses to participate in the Florida Student Association, mainly because it charges membership fees, so they do not have a chance to have a representative on the State Board of Governors of the universities. So if passed, Amendment 12 would instruct the Board of Governors to create a new council consisting of the student body presidents of all 11 universities. And the chair of that new council would replace the president of the Florida Student Association as a student representative to the Board of Governors. And the effects of voting yes and no. Okay, and before we begin with speakers, do you have any general questions on the information presented so far? Okay, then our first speaker will be Johnny Jackson, and he will talk about why his group is in favor of Amendment 8.
All right, well, hello. My name is Johnny Jackson. I'm a talk show host here locally in Bradenton, right down the street. And my show is the Johnny Jackson Show. It's on weekdays, every weekday at 11 a.m. And I talk about political issues, and that's 1490 a.m., WWPR, the Conservative Talk Network. Now, I'm happily married. I've been married for 18 years to my beautiful wife, Heather. And we have two daughters, Amber and Alexis. She loves it when I say that, by the way. But we have two daughters. We've raised them. They're teenagers, and their names are Amber and Alexis. And I would like to first thank Rosalie Schaefer and everyone here at the Bradenton Women's Club for having me here to speak. And you may see the button, I'm speaking in favor of Amendment 8. And I am a Baptist, but I was asked to speak by the Diocese of Venice on this issue. They are in favor of this, as well as a lot of the people that I know are in favor, but I also have friends that are opposed to this Amendment 8. But I want to talk about the first misconception of Amendment 8, and I believe that some of these misconceptions were talked about in the very beginning of this presentation. The first misconception is that Amendment 8 is not about school vouchers. I'm not a lawyer, but the Bush versus Holmes Florida State Supreme Court decision was not based on the no aid provision. It was not based on the Blaine Amendment. In fact, it specifically excluded, their ruling specifically excluded the Blaine Amendment and the no aid provision. The Florida State Supreme Court ruled that vouchers could not happen because of the Article 9, the uniformity clause, which requires the state to provide a uniform, efficient, secure, and high-quality system of free public schools. So the first thing is, this is not changed. This will not change that uniformity clause. It will not change Article 9. Therefore, if Article 9, the Florida statute that was used by the Florida Supreme Court to rule against and to oppose school vouchers, stays the same, even if you vote yes on Amendment 8, Article 9 stays in place. So school vouchers are still not going to happen, even if you vote for yes on Amendment 8. So that is the first misconception. The Florida State Supreme Court's ruling stays in place, and the voucher system remains out of play for Florida. So if school vouchers are off the table, if you vote yes and there's still no school vouchers, what is this really about? That becomes the question. Now, it's instructive to look at why this amendment was proposed. So for years, 2 halfway houses in Florida, Prisoners of Christ and Lamb of God Ministries, have provided substance abuse, counseling, housing, other services to recently released prisoners in Florida, all entirely on a voluntary basis, but the programs help to reintegrate released prisoners back into society, and they reduce the number of repeat offenders. They are reducing crime. And the reward that these two programs got back in 2007 for reducing crime in Florida was a lawsuit by a New York-based political interest group. This New York-based political interest group is called the Council on Human Secularism, and they are based in New York, not in Florida. And so this lawsuit happened in 2007. In 2008, a district court dismissed the case and said, because of the fact that these two halfway houses have secular goals, and they're basing this on the Blaine Amendment. They said they had secular goals of reducing recidivism, which means people don't come back. There's no more repeat, they're reducing that, and reducing repeat offenders, that they had secular goals, so they weren't necessarily goals tied to a religion. But then in 2008, an appeals court took away some of that ruling, and so now that case is back in a trial court. And so that lawsuit and the fact that the director of the Council on Human Secularism said that this lawsuit could be, if it's ruled in their favor, could be a springboard to mounting other challenges. Now that's particular language that the director of the Council on Human Secularism said. A springboard to other challenges piqued the interest of two legislators in Florida, State Senator Thad Altman and State Representative Scott Placon. And they both have said repeatedly that they want to protect religiously based social services. So that's what this is about. This is not about school vouchers. Amendment 8 cannot change. Your vote on Amendment 8 cannot change school vouchers. It can't change Article 9 of the Florida Constitution. And that's what it would have to change to be able to enable school vouchers. So when someone tells you that this is about school vouchers, they are wrong. Ask them, how will it change Article 9? Because it won't. And that is the law that the Florida State Supreme Court used to rule against school vouchers. Now, who would be affected if you vote no on Amendment 8? Faith-based food banks, homeless shelters, soup kitchens, halfway houses, religious hospitals that provide Medicare and Medicaid services, elderly care, and indigent care. These include well-known groups like the Salvation Army and Habitat for Humanity. They would be impacted if you voted no on Amendment 8. Now, how would it impact those affected? Of course, if they were to lose the ability to apply for, in essence, the access to state funds, it could mean an end to the services they provide. Ultimately, the people that would be most affected if you voted no on Amendment 8 would be those needy individuals and families that have been hardest hit by the downturn in the economy. A vote no would hurt needy people. Now, what about the religious institutions and organizations that say the government should not be involved in the church at all? Well, I have some words to say about that. I'll use that in my rebuttal. But why is this so important? It's important for you to vote yes on Amendment 8 because voting yes for Amendment 8 ensures that services and institutions that are already in place could not be put to the same legal challenge as the two prison halfway houses in the Council for Secular Humanism and the McNeil case. Now listen, here's the deal. This is not going to give millions of dollars to religious groups. A vote yes does not automatically give millions of dollars to religious groups. It ensures that they maintain the same access that they have to state funds. That's it. It doesn't give any new money. It doesn't provide millions of dollars to school voucher programs. It simply maintains the current access that they have. Because what's going to fall if we allow these legal challenges, one by one, the Florida social safety net for needy individuals and families will be taken out on the basis that the people that are giving them, Salvation Army or food banks, all faith food banks, are religious based. So it's important that you vote yes. Now, there's a lot being said in the newspapers and on TV and radio about Amendment 8. Some of what is being said is true. Some of what is being said is not true. Most of what is being said is being paid for by big super PACs with millions of dollars of money from groups just like the New York-based Council for Human Secularism and other outside political groups. I'm a local person. I live here in Florida. I believe in God, and I believe that no one should be discriminated against by their government solely on the basis that they go to church. I urge you to support religious freedom, and I ask that you vote yes for Amendment 8. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. I believe you've presented about as good an argument as you can present for Amendment 8. And let me first of all say I'm going to quickly agree with you on some things you said and disagree with you, I think, on the basic items that you got down to. Now, first, I'm vice president of the local chapter, Sarasota Manatee, of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. So I'm a local person, just like Johnny is. I've been here 21 years at least. I don't know whether you were born here, but that's a good little while in any event. I'm not speaking here when I'm urging a vote against Amendment 8 as Vice President of Americans United. I'm speaking instead as a representative of a nationally based organization, though it's registered in the state of Florida, called Vote No on 8. We like to say, don't take the bait, vote no on 8, because the bait is out there in a misunderstandable sort of way. The reason that I'm speaking in that capacity, and I make a note of it, is because you have to be registered as a PAC or you have to be a political organization to urge a vote, specifically no or yes. We can present all sorts of arguments why it's a bad idea as a representative of Americans United, but in urging a vote, we have to be registered. That's why I have that capacity. Now, first of all, let me just take up a few items. I have to debate them before I get into the reasons why it's a bad idea. I have to rebut, I think, a couple of them. One, Johnny mentioned that Section 9 of the Florida Constitution is the basis for the court ruling. The court ruling that he mentioned that indicates that a specific voucher program was not legal in the state of Florida. That's because the people who brought the challenge were educators who brought the challenge on the basis of Amendment 9, of Section 9, which requires adequate funding for public education in the state of Florida. Had they brought it on the basis of Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution, we believe it would have been overruled on that basis. But it wasn't tried, therefore that's sort of irrelevant. Secondly, what about in other words, it would permit vouchers in the state of Florida if you can overcome the objection brought under Section 9. Now, what about the idea that social welfare organizations performing a good purpose could not be allowed to continue if Amendment 8 is voted down? All these things are happening now, provided social religious organizations who perform a good social purpose do not do three things. One, they can't proselytize, they can't discriminate in employment of people on those programs using government money, and they can't discriminate on the recipients. They can't say only good Catholics or only good Muslims or only good whatever can receive funds under those. Now, as long as they don't do those three things, and I point out a number of them are receiving government funds now under the same restrictions that would apply if Amendment 8 is defeated, and they have no problem doing it, and we don't object to it because they are religious-based. We would object to it if they discriminated on the basis of recipients on employment or tried to proselytize people while they're there. That keeps, in effect, the religious-based organizations honest in a way. They generally don't try to do it. If they do try to discriminate on these bases, we try to down. Now, the voucher things, there are 2 voucher programs now which are questionable. One, there is a program allowing vouchers for people who have a handicap, a specific handicap. They haven't been challenged yet. They could be challenged if Amendment 8 does not pass. And the other one is the tax exemption program. Corporations can now deduct from their state taxes. They can deduct the amounts that they dedicate to having students go to specific religious organizations that are approved, churches and so on, for regular programs. Nobody is discriminating against anyone now, nor would they be if this is defeated. Remember, if it's defeated, the same thing that's been in the Florida Constitution for 126 years would remain, a basic protection of separation of church and state. Where you have places where church and state are not separated, there is a great tendency for violence because one side or another, we see it all around the world, is favored by the state. We see it in Muslim countries today. We've seen it in Northern Ireland, where the Protestant side was favored over the Catholic side for many years. Great violence, bombs and so on took place there. It's a can of worms you're opening up not only for the violence region, but because this very, I think, badly worded amendment, and it is an amendment to the Florida Constitution that you're putting on if you vote on Amendment 8. We passed out these little sheets, and take a look at them. It shows these are neutral sheets. They don't say vote for or for against or vote against. It simply says what would be removed from the Constitution, namely that no revenue of the state or any political subdivision or agency thereof shall ever be taken from the public treasury directly or indirectly in aid of any church, sect, or religious denomination, or in aid of any sectarian institution, and substitute no individual or entity may be discriminated against or barred from receiving funding on the basis of religious identity or belief. That's a real can of worms. A radical Muslim organization, for example, if it wanted to have an organization doing some social welfare work, or, and here I disagree with Johnny, or a school that wanted state funds, could insist, if a Catholic school or a Protestant school or whatever were getting money, that they had the same right to get federal money for that. The Scientology church or a Scientology religion, or whatever you want to call it, is quite controversial because of a number of things that it does. It has had a school, I understand, at least one, up in Clearwater in the past, which did not get state funds. It would have every right to get as much as Catholic or what have you to get state funds under such a program. Something like Jim Jones founded down with a massacre in Guyana would also get funds under that program. So it's a bad idea. It would violate the basic principle of church and state, namely the wall of separation, which Thomas Jefferson was the first one to illustrate that in a famous letter to the Danbury Baptists, that there shall be a wall of separation between church and state. And the First Amendment of the federal Constitution provides for that. The one in Florida is more clear, it's more direct, and it should remain as part of the First Amendment to the Florida Constitution under the Constitution that we have now, and therefore I urge, just as a number of other things that I'll point out in my rebuttal, have urged defeat of this amendment. Thank you.
Okay, and let me say, a great presentation, Mr. Wade Mitchell. Let's give him a round of applause. He did a great job. Wade Matthews, sorry. I knew it was Wade, but let me just rebut for just a second. There's a little bit of confusion in what Wade is saying. First of all, and I'll tackle the vouchers in a second, but first of all, he's saying, under the current law, religious institutions are already getting money and it's fine now. And as long as it's okay with Wade and his groups, and they do follow 3 rules, which I believe is the establishment clause, is what you were referring to. As long as it's okay with Wade's groups, they won't file a lawsuit, and they won't try to get an injunction and stop them from getting money. However, it's not okay with the Council for Human Secularism for 2 prison groups to get state funds. And that is the point, is that this director of the Council for Human Secularism decided that these 2 groups who were getting money weren't following his plan and decided to file a lawsuit. The lawsuit was dismissed and then reopened and is open now. And so any group, whether it's the Salvation Army, Habitat for Humanity, if this law is not defined, if this amendment is not changed, if the Blaine Amendment is not taken off the books, either applied absolutely as an absolute law and say no state monies for religious institutions, or it is repealed and amended, then we are open to these challenges. The Salvation Army is open to a challenge. The Habitat for Humanity is open to a challenge. Catholic hospitals are open to a challenge. Catholic charities are open to a challenge. Everyone is open to a challenge. So I think there's some confusion there. What Wade is basically saying is the law's working fine because we're ignoring it and not enforcing it when we don't want to. And as long as that continues, we should have no problems. But that is not the way the rule of law works. We need to have this explicitly laid out. And if charities can get money and they're still religious charities, that's the way it should be. And we need that explained, and that's what this amendment would do. Secondly, Article 9, I would ask Wade to clarify just a little bit because he kind of danced over it, and that is, does Amendment 8 directly affect Article 9, the Florida Constitution statute, which the Florida Supreme Court ruled against vouchers? If it does not affect it, vouchers cannot come back by voting yes for Amendment 8. So I only have a minute. I wish we had more time. Can we just have a little bit more time? Is that okay?
Yes.
And so you know, if Amendment 8, if voting yes on Amendment 8 does not change Article 9, and we need some clarification on this, does it or does it not change Article 9 of the Florida Constitution? If it does not, then vouchers are not legal and cannot happen, whether you vote yes or no on Amendment 8. Now, another thing that Wade talked about was favored religions. Nowhere on the paper that you have does it favor any religion. It says all religions. This is equal and fair opportunity to access public funds by all religions. Now, yes, there are bad religions. What Wade likes to point out, and I'm certain that a lot of people that are against religion like to point out the Jim Jones Guyana tragedy. Yes, it was a religion, and Jim Jones was a preacher, and there are bad preachers, there are bad religions. However, there are good religions, and they are doing a lot of good all around the world, and they're doing good right here in Florida. And what Amendment 8 will do is simply maintain their access to apply. Now, it's a very important point. They're not getting money automatically because Amendment 8 is voted yes. They still have to apply to the state and go through the same stringent process that every other organization that wants public funds would get. So again, I ask you, I want the clarification on Article 9, and then also clear up the confusion on whether or not it is legal for religious charities to get money. And if they are, is it illegal under the current statute right now? I'll leave that for Wade. Thank you.
Take those 2 things first.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, good. So first of all, unlike probably anybody else here, I once knew Jim Jones. I met him in Guyana. I visited the People's Temple place. I was the deputy chief of mission and charge of the U.S. Embassy down there, and found him a very pleasant individual. I met him twice actually, but a little weird. In any event, quite a lot weird. Now, Amendment 9 would require a legislation in order to give any religious body funds under the proposed amendment. However, the proposed amendment says no individual or entity may be discriminated against or barred from receiving funding on the basis of religious identity or belief. Don't you think that any religion that is not given the same sort of funding, at least on a per capita basis or something of that nature, is not going to bring a lawsuit and tie this up in the court? And clearly, that says that it could not be discriminated against. On the other one, on the other item, what about Section 9? That would remain in effect, but you would have a constitutional conflict here. This says you cannot discriminate in any way on the basis of religious identity or belief, yet Article 9 says that you have to adequately fund public education. Now, which one is more specific? What is adequate funding? The court said that this would make it not adequate, but what they ruled against, but that could be interpreted in a very different way, and therefore you could it would be more apt to be set aside and say, well, it's still adequate enough. In sum, I want to say just two things. One, this clearly erodes the principle of church-state separation that has served us well for 126 years in Florida. Religious organizations then could receive state funds, and they could discriminate, nothing saying they couldn't, in their hiring. They could discriminate in the recipients. They could discriminate in proselytizing people. I don't think we really want that. It harms the Floridian civil rights in that way. It opens the door it does open the door to school vouchers, more school vouchers. And just in illustrating the organizations that have carefully analyzed this and come out against it, you have the League of Women Voters, as I understand. The ACLU has done that. The Democratic Party has come out against it, strongly against it. And just today, there was an editorial in the Sarasota Herald Tribune, like many other newspapers around the state. The Herald Tribune has come out firmly against this amendment. I don't know about the Bradenton Herald. I'll have to have somebody tell me what's happened on that. But the Herald Tribune, which has a Bradenton edition, of course, has come out against it. So I urge you to vote this down. It's unnecessary. What we have now has worked very well and will continue to work in the future. Thank you.
Now we'll have Nick Azara, and he's going to talk about the amendments that affect the county. And I would like to ask the speakers, if they can, to remain for questions from the audience after we're finished with the scheduled speakers. So up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Rosalie. Thank you, League of Women Voters. Special thanks to Rosalie for hosting these forums, and to the League. And I have to commend all of you for attending these forums. I don't know if you attended the one about a month ago on the first series of amendments, but they're incredibly informative, and I personally appreciate anyone willing to learn more about them. I passed out to you, as you were coming in, a worksheet that's kind of a summary of what the 6 of the proposed constitutional amendments, how they could fiscally impact local government. Today we're speaking specifically on the latter half of the amendments, amendments 9, 10, and 11. I can address questions related to the other side of the page if you'd like, but for the purposes of today's conversation, we wanted to focus on Amendment 9, which is the homestead property tax exemption for surviving spouses of military veterans or first responders. Important to note that there's this looks very similar to Amendment 2 on this year's ballot, which would give disabled veterans a discount on their property taxes. State law has granted a property tax exemption to eligible military spouses since 1997. The implementation has been a little bit difficult, but this amendment, Amendment 9, would expand the eligibility to first responders. And there are definitely some things to like about this amendment. If you're a spouse of a local responder who's died in the line of duty. We don't have the local projected impacts. As I mentioned with some of the other property tax amendments, this simply opens the door of eligibility. The potential recipient would still have to apply for that particular property tax exemption, so we don't know we don't really have a good idea, but it would probably be a relatively minimal impact of Amendment 9 would have on local government. I'm going to skip Amendment 10 for just a minute and go to Amendment 11, which would grant an additional property tax exemption to low-income seniors, those aged over 65, who Rosalie mentioned make no more than $27,030, I believe is the figure. It would allow counties and cities, not the school boards though, to grant the full property tax exemptions to seniors who meet those criteria. It's another piece of targeted, it's a targeted property tax amendment that would benefit probably a small group of people on the local level. And again, we don't have an estimate of how many people it would benefit in Manatee County or what the local impact could be. And the same can be said for the amendments on the other side of the page for the most part, with the exception maybe of Amendment 4. We have some idea that would be a much bigger hit. We can talk about that later if you like. But in regard to, I'll back up now to Amendment 10 unless you have questions on the prior two. Amendment 10 is mostly for business owners. It's called the Tangible Personal Property Tax Amendment, but what it does is raise from $25,000 to $50,000 the property tax, the personal property tax for local businesses. So, and it would benefit proportionately the smaller businesses, like a Keaton's more than, say, Tropicana. So it would raise their property tax, personal property tax exemption from $25,000 to $50,000. The Florida Association of Counties broke that amendment out and the potential it could have on local government. In Manatee County, I believe the first year's impact would be about $190,000 on Manatee County revenues, which the proposed amendment would also give cities and counties the ability to raise it above the $50,000 threshold if they saw fit. As such, I believe the Association of Counties kind of stood down on that issue and maybe was even supportive of it. Manatee County, there are certain pieces of legislation from prior years that really prevent the county from spending any money to influence one way or the other. So what I try to do when I attend these forums is to educate and not to influence. We can only give you so much education because we don't have the total ramifications in mind of what these amendments could cost. But in general, I just wanted to mention that all of the property tax related amendments on the ballot in less than a month from now, on November 6th, would definitely offer tax relief to some very specific groups, and it would further kind of erode local tax revenues. A lot of the amendments are kind of being packaged as a tax break, but in the long term, I think what you might find is that there'll be a tax shift, because the further you reduce local revenues, the less local governments will have to work with. And that means eventually coming to taxpayers to ask for more help to continue local services for the programs that you've become accustomed to receiving, whether that's lifeguards, library hours. In Manatee County, we've cut $130 million over the past 5 years, for whether that's a result of reduced property values or prior constitutional amendments that have reduced our tax base. But in general, we've had to reduce hours at libraries. We've got fewer lifeguards on beaches, and other quality of life services have also kind of received some of the funding reductions. And the more that we continue to reduce those revenue sources, and the more unfair we make the tax structure in Florida, the less local government will have to provide those services, or will end up raising millage rates to fund those community needs. With that, again, I appreciate everyone's efforts to learn more about these amendments, and I encourage you to read as much as you can about them. There's 11 amendments on the ballot in November, and if you're not familiar with them or you don't have a good idea of which way you're going to vote going into the ballot or into the polls that day, you're going to be a little dizzy looking at your ballot. So I, again, encourage you to learn all you can, and I can try to answer some questions about the specific amendments related to the property tax reductions if you have any. Thank you.
Now we're going to have an open discussion of the issues you've been listening about today. Mr. Matthews and Mr. Azara. Mr. Jackson had to leave, but if you have any questions about the issues, Mr. Azara and Mr. Matthews, would you please use the microphone over there, state your name and your question.
My name is Ed, and I have a question about amendment number 10. As I read the handout that we had today, it says, if passed, would raise, et cetera, and I thought I understood you to say just now that it could raise it. Is that correct?
Excuse me, maybe I misspoke, sir. It would raise from $25,000 to $50,000 the tangible personal property tax for local businesses. It would also give local governments the ability to raise it beyond $50,000 if they saw a benefit to the local businesses. Again, a lot of local governments have been supportive of Amendment 10 as a way to provide some stimulus for local businesses, which it would proportionately benefit as opposed to the Tropicanas where it might be kind of a drop in the bucket.
The only amendment that the Sarasota Herald Tribune this morning recommended a favorable vote for was Amendment 10. They recommended a favorable vote because that doubling the personal exemption, that is the exemption for personal property tax, not personal, property tax, would stimulate small businesses and therefore help the economy without doing too much damage to the budgets of the counties. Just thought it was a matter of interest.
My name is Joe Williams. I'm sorry that the other gentleman had to leave. It's my understanding that organizations such as the Salvation Army were started as private organizations to help people, and it seems, and I realize that now they do get money from the state. This has happened gradually, it seems, and now we sort of take it for granted. But in a way, it seems that if people realize that the state can give money to these organizations, then they're thinking, well, if my taxes are supporting them, I don't need to give individually. I mean, it changes the whole tenor in a way, gradually changes the whole tenor of what these organizations are all about. So I would think that it would be wise to keep it as it is and vote against this amendment.
My name is Grace, and I'm just wondering, Amendment 10, just attending a second meeting here, I'm wondering if how long Amendment 10 has been in effect, because now with computers and modern equipment, a small business might need more money to just fund that, to run a small business, and therefore they would need more money. But anyway, that's one.
The $25,000, are you asking how
I'm
long
asking
the
the increase from $25,000 to $50,000 might be a good idea, because computer equipment, just when people come in the door, they need that. Years ago, you wouldn't need a computer to service someone. So,
Right, and that's one of the kind of the selling points of that proposal. It's not on the books yet. Of course, the voters will be each of these amendments will have to be approved by 60% of the voters who turn out in November. But the first $25,000 is what's exempt, and this would raise it to $50,000.
right.
Thank you, Rosalie. If you're here last for the first of these two seminars, Jim Seifert was here to speak a little bit on Amendment 4. and he's a lot more informed on these issues than I am. But Amendment 4 would definitely have the ability to impact local government to the tune of about $1.1 million in the first year it would be implemented, and about that much each year beyond that. So $2 million in the second year, $3 million in the third year, $4 million in the fourth year, and so on. Amendment 4 is, do I have my, I won't read it to you, but there are 3 very specific areas. It would close the recapture rule that currently allows your taxable value to rise by about 3% when your market value has dropped. So in those recessionary times, your tax bill may have continued to go up despite your market value going down. It would close that off. Amendment 4 would also reduce for non-homesteaded properties the taxes from 10% to 5%. That's being aimed as a kind of a business starter. But I'll warn you that, again, it's not a tax break. It could be definitely a tax shift. And the Association of Counties is telling people that this would be a tax break mostly for snowbirds. And whereas if you're a homesteader and you enjoy a 3% cap on your property taxes, the non-homesteaders would have theirs reduced from 10 to 5, and it basically again reduces the revenue generating sources, and eventually it evens it out, and local officials may be coming to raise millage rates as a result of that. And the final component of Amendment 4 would create a first-time homeowner tax exemption for up to 50% of a home's value. And there's some interesting definitions there about what a first-time home buyer is. I believe in this the way it's defined, it would apply to anyone who has not owned a home within the past 3 years. So be careful what you wish for on Amendment 4. Amendment 3 is more aimed at state government, and it's, if you're at all familiar with Colorado's Tabor Law, it's the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and it's an amendment to the Colorado Constitution that was adopted in, I believe, 1992, and it lasted maybe about 8 or 10 years, and the voters had to repeal several different sections of the Tabor Law because what they found was it was putting a regulator on the rate that local government could grow to keep pace with the community. And so would it put constraints on the amount of revenues that the state government could collect? They weren't able to keep pace with the cost of roads and bridges and schools and prisons that needed to be built in response to new residents in Colorado. So again, local governments were a bit relieved when we were taken out of the amendment. I believe, I don't know if it was a year or two ago that this was placed on the ballot, but so it would not apply to local governments, but the general thought is if Florida's state revenues are capped at a certain amount and fewer social services agencies are able to go to the state to ask for funding, they'll end up coming to the local governments, and we're kind of strapped as it is.
Okay, that's all we have for today. I want to thank our speakers very much for coming today. We learned a great deal just from listening to the pros and cons and all the extra information they've added to this program. And if any of you missed the first part of this program, they will be showing it on METV on the 10th, tomorrow night at 10:30 p.m. And it's Bright House 614, Comcast 19, and Verizon 31. I want to thank METV very much for taping our programs, which, by the way, you can also watch on their YouTube link. You can go on their website, www.metvweb.com, and click on the YouTube link, and all of our programs will come up. And I want to mention today, before we leave, that we have the most wonderful voter registration team I have ever seen in my life. They have done a tremendous job. Each one of you stand up, voter registrars. They have done an outstanding job. They have registered hundreds of new voters, given out hundreds of our informational flyers. And our next amendment program will be on October 18th. And if you know anybody who hasn't seen any of these, tell them to come to that one. It will be held in a different location. It'll be at the Women's Resource Center. And yeah, that's at, let's see. Anybody know the address offhand? I didn't bring it with me. Right. It's right down the street. You'll see it on the north side of the street. And that'll start at 5:30 p.m. on the 18th. And let's see. Okay, and see our website for any information you need. We have our newly printed voters' guides to both the local elections now, and you're welcome to take some home to give to your neighbors and friends as you leave. Thank you so much for coming today.